Okay, hi everyone. So again, I'm Smithy Q and welcome. We're now at game six of the annotated game section. This is going to be between an amateur and N against Varga, master from the past. And this is a game where we're actually going to be looking at D4. We don't look at a lot of D4 games through my course. This is just because when I'm looking through sort of a glimpse behind the scenes is that when I put this course together, I look through predominantly the games of the great masters of the past. So basically 1920s and earlier, and the vast majority of those games were E4 based, and that's why the vast majority of the opening principles course is based off of 1E4. Anyway, so we're going to take a look at this. In the opening, it's fairly standard. We got C4, Queen's Gambit. Again, the whole point of this, just so you know, is that after takes, now there's no more pawn in the center, and this gives white the option of playing e5 and getting that center pawn, and then immediately winning this pawn back. Very likely. It's more complicated than that, but that's the general idea. And so the most popular move for centuries has been e6, because then after the exchange, we still have that pawn in the center. That's essentially what happens. We go knight c3, and then black plays what's known as the Tarrasch defense with c5, just counterattacking in the center. This um, either coerces white to play e3 himself, which blocks in this bishop. Sorry, let me just sort of back up. Like the Queen's Gambit 101. When you play e6 as black, you're controlling the center. It's absolutely excellent. We're preparing to castle very quickly. That's wonderful. The downside is this bishop sucks. We would really like white to take this pawn, because then the pawn disappears. Again, we see that. Now all of a sudden our bishop is alive, the bishop isn't bad anymore. Okay. By playing c5, what black is doing is essentially giving white a choice of what white wants to do. Is white going to just mirror and play e3 himself, blocking in his own bishop? Because then black's no worse off than white. If black takes, well, again, now white has lost some control of the center, and so black's going to be able to take this pawn. He's probably going to push d4 first, in all honesty. But at the very least, white is losing some control of the center. Or, like what happens in the game, white will choose to take on c5, takes, and then we've reached the main tabia, or the main starting point of the Tarrasch. Will be even more obvious here. And we can see that black has absolutely no problems with developing his pieces. All of his pieces are going to come to very logical squares. He's going to castle. He's got open files for his rooks. This is generally a pretty easy position to play. But there's always a catch. And the catch we'll see after g3. And so the disadvantage of black's setup, again, strategically speaking, is that this pawn is going to become isolated. Very clearly, at some point, there's going to be an exchange, or even if there isn't an exchange, there is simply going to be pressure applied to this pawn, and there are no pawns that can defend it. And so black gets free and easy piece play, but he has to defend this weakness. And that's how this game typically revolves. Black has pawn weaknesses, but in exchange, he has piece activity. And we're going to see a version of that play out in this game. So I'm just going to redraw my arrows so that way they appear on the study. Then after knight f6, bishop g2, c takes d4. Why c takes d4? This is one of the two most common moves in this position. The general idea is that if black were to play bishop goes to e7, probably the most natural move, at some point white is probably going to take, and then the bishop's going to come here. And so in other words, this bishop's going to have to move twice to come to this square. Instead, by taking, now there will be no d takes c5, and so the bishop can develop anywhere on the diagonal. The downside, of course, is that now this knight is on a better square. So advantages and disadvantages to every move. Now, black now plays queen goes to b6, and it's kind of interesting. Of all the games that I've shared in the annotated games section, especially games where it's an amateur versus a master, like here, I think this is the game where black probably plays the worst according to Stockfish modern evaluations. But hopefully we can also just see from our general opening principles, this is probably not the best move. Should we be moving our queen early in the game instead of finishing developing our castling? Probably not. And so if we want to play, the bishop c5 makes a lot of sense. Bishop d4. Developing this bishop and castling is probably what we should be doing. Anyway, queen goes to b6, and this kind of coerces white to exchange. Takes. And the switch, if I could talk, the situation has now changed. Before, again, we had this isolated pawn right here, so that pawn was weak. After the exchange, we now have what's known as a hanging pawn structure. That is, there are two pawns, they have no pawns beside them, and they're on completely open files. And so White's got this long-term plan of playing against this. Just imagine if we get maybe the rooks, maybe the other rook's going to slide over, and there's going to be all this pressure on the c pawn, and Black's going to have to defend it. And then the problem is if this pawn ever moves forward, well then this pawn has lost the defender. And it's pretty crappy if you have to have a bishop or a rook that's doing nothing but just defending a pawn. That's typically not what your pieces want to do. We want to use the pieces to attack and do something, rather than just, playing guard duty. So again, this is going to be that strategic battle now. It's shifted, but it's still the white pieces against the black pawns. That's the general strategic idea. And now here, it's funny, I have got the Lichess database opened up. In almost 1,000 games, White has played the right move 97% of the time. And I think you could probably guess what that is. It's simply castle. It's not that hard. Let's castle, finish development, and then do something. In this game, White played a very strange move, e4. And I included this game for a couple of reasons. One is for the sequence we're going to see in a second. But two, we need to know what to do when our opponents play like bad moves. How should we react? Now, I think what White is doing is White is really focused on, again, these pawns. He wants to exchange, and then his bishop and everything is now going to be attacking the main weakness. It's colored the proper color. There we go. So I think White is really focused on those strategic ideas. But those strategic ideas, though important, they still pale in comparison to the main opening task. Let's finish developing, king safety, and center. Right? Yeah, we're acting the center, but we still have a weak king, and especially if the center completely opens up. Black recognizes that and plays bishop goes to b4. He's finishing development. He's putting pressure on the center. What are you going to do, White? You got to be very careful. If you start advancing your pawn, well, all of a sudden we got weaknesses on f2. We got weaknesses on c3. Uh-oh, looks like the e4 advance backfired. The best move might be simply doing this. But we can see how unhappy this. Now this bishop is going to live. And we've got all these weak squares over here. And so if White castles kingside, again, there's major weaknesses. But if White doesn't castle kingside, where's he going to go? Black has two bishops on an open board. Very difficult position for White. And so he doesn't advance. He instead plays bishop goes to d2. Okay, what is Black ends up exchanging, which isn't a bad move. But even stronger would be the idea that we'll see in a second. Bishop goes to a6. But let's look at the game. Takes the pawn. Takes. Uh-oh. Takes. Takes. So we look at the position. Material is perfectly equal. We got a problem, though. Bishop goes to a6. Oh dear gosh. And so this bishop is now preventing White from castling. A couple of moves earlier, White could have castled and had his king completely safe. But now this bishop is just doing a super effective job of keeping this king locked in the center. Meanwhile, we're able to castle super quickly, super easily, and then our rooks are going to come to the center. And there's absolutely no safety for this king. So what does White do? It's really hard to think of a good move for White at this point. He ends up playing rook goes to c1. Why not? Let's just keep ganging up on those pawns. Throughout the course, I've talked about thought process errors where it looks like our opponents are thinking about the wrong thing. It does look like White has been focusing on trying to attack these pawns without finishing development. I guess he was kind of controlling the center, but certainly not having king safety. At the same time, it's really hard to think of a better move. We're going to castle. Our king is perfectly safe. White isn't. We're going to take. And again, here's where the king safety idea is going to help us find sort of this next little idea. It's pretty creative, but it helps if we realize that right now, the white king, it has nowhere to run, right? Everything is completely covered. And so if it were check, and there's no way to block it, it would be mate. And we also see we have this open e-file. How can we combine that? Well, black took the rook. Now the e-file is completely open. Let's slide something over. Okay, you can take it, sure. Take, take. It's still check. The king has nowhere to run. We can't block with this guy. Oh, frig, it's still pinned. And so the only move is to give back the queen. But then after check, here's where White resigned. White is down already a lot of material. There's no help. It doesn't matter where the king moves. If we go here, we're going to lose the bishop to discover check. And if we go here, well, again, it's still check. You're just going to you're going to get completely run over. And so, again, this game, it's showing, okay, for one, a very brief introduction to the Queen's Gambit, the general ideas and strategic ideas. But it also shows that those strategic ideas, they still take a back seat to developing our pieces and especially king safety. But for me, the main thing that I saw when I was reviewing this game, when I first saw it, was simply the power of this bishop. If your king is stuck in the center, and sorry, if you can develop your bishop such that your opponent, before your opponent is castled, then they can't castle. And here, there's no way to block it, right? Like, normally this bishop would want to come back to e2, but that's going to take a long time. That's really hard. And again, we're going to bring a rook over to the e file very, very quickly, so that's not going to work. Maybe you have a knight that can jump in, but there are no knights. We only have this dark square bishop, which is completely useless. Obviously, we don't want to block with the queen. And so this bishop goes to a6 is incredibly powerful and is worth remembering by itself. And in fact, let me just very briefly share it. Again, the whole idea is that we want to, let's see if I can bring it up. Fantastic. Use these ideas in our own games. This is one of my games from, I don't know when, it was a while ago. This is on chess.com. We're going to see from this position, I ended up castling, my opponent hasn't castled. Let me just look at through. There's all this tension in the center, my opponent just plays a3. Okay, fine. Take, I take the pawn. What are you going to do? He ends up playing, bishop takes a6, I recapture, here we go. And we've got now the two main things. All right, this is pretty simple. Let's use the open e file to attack the rook. He plays bishop f3, there it is. Bishop goes to a6. Now we can't castle. And also, we've got this check possibly coming in. We've got the other rook sliding over, this coming in. And even though material is completely equal, the last few moves from white kept material equal, but at the cost of his king being the center. And that is lights out. The game didn't last much longer. He played c3. What else? I bring both rooks over. I'm able to throw in this check. Oh, now my queen is going to slide in, and my play is just so easy, so natural. I'm able to play f4 now. Um, Again, the bishop's pinned. Everything is terrible. And then I'm able to finish the game off not too much longer. And so this was a really easy move to find because I remembered the power of the bishop a6 from these types of games. And so again, when you're reviewing these annotated games, try and find those nuggets, those little things that just jump out at you. It's like, wow, this particular arrangement of pieces, or my opponent, he advanced in the center before castling. That might get, get the bishop over to stop the castling. Anything like that is anytime you learn that, and it's something you can use in a later game, again, it's just another tool in the toolbox. So as you go through games, as you analyze, as you look through your own games, that's really what you want. It's not just what move I should have played, but rather what are the ideas and concepts I can apply to other games as well. I'm going to try and keep harping on that throughout, so that way you're not just, learning about these games, but again, we're increasing the toolboxes that you have. Anyway, that's enough rambling. Hopefully you found that interesting, helpful, and useful. Otherwise, I'm Smithy Q, and I'll see you in the next game. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.